Greetings. It is time again for Quoggling Sand. I need some theme music, or maybe I don't. I don't know. Today is the 16th of June, 2021. I normally have been trying to get a weekly recorded on Monday evening or Tuesday morning. Try to publish it on Tuesday. This week is a little hectic, and we're coming up on my birthday, which will include a sort of an odd story. Not necessarily a wonderful one, but we'll get there and we'll see what you think. But today I will talk about something I've been reading and watching presentations about quite a bit, substantial amount of time spent learning about the state of the art in event-sourced microservice architecture and the good and the bad and the ugly of same. And I think it's very unusual because it's unusual, and it's not unusual because of what it is, but it's unusual because it kind of jibes with some of the sort of the human factor stuff that I've been thinking about. I've been aiming at forming a nonprofit for for ideation and innovation in the assistive technology spaces using a co-creation model. So what we hope to accomplish is connecting some of the project development, product development eventually. So some of the stuff before it becomes a product in the early ideation stages, connect that process with users in a co-creation model. So invite actual people who will use, and assistive technology is one particular segment of products and services. So, but it's something where I've long believed that there's something left on the table. So we're getting to work on that. In fact, in a few days, we'll have a kind of a mini pre-board meeting and see about the paperwork side of nonprofit, eventual charitable foundation type thing. Anyway, so as I've been kind of pondering the real world projects that I've been pondering, the way that microservices and communication and failover and coordination and all the stuff that happens behind the scenes of your Netflix page or program load when you are selecting your next item in the queue or billing or all the stuff. Netflix has a lot of microservice presentations, although over the last year, 2 years, maybe 3 years, there's been a much more diverse set of presenters. But anyway, all the stuff that goes on, I see some parallels between human interaction and the way microservices are architected. And so mono versus micro, as in monolithic versus microservices. And as a solo entrepreneur, what that means is I'm working by myself because I can't find anybody to work with, which sounds more dire, but is somewhat true. I would say if I tried harder, I would probably find someone, but there is something to be said for taking an idea and running with it. So that part's okay. But when it comes time to deploy, right? So just like anything, I can make one of something. I can make one cup of coffee. I can make one muffin. I can make one pizza. I can make one application. But if I need to suddenly make 1,000 or 1,000,000 of something, then the solo entrepreneur must seek help. So the mono versus micro notion kind of scales out for people and for software projects. So it's been interesting to ponder just in general. I mean, for those of us who've been sorry with my allergies as always. the challenge for anybody who's been working from home was how do you communicate with any coworkers or colleagues or students or teachers or whatever your mode was for a chunk of 2020. So there's, how do you communicate? How do you share information? How do you teach a class when people aren't necessarily engaged because the setting is not right? Or how do you have a meeting when people are Zoom fatigued? Or and this is something that software people are probably there's a slight edge, I think, just because of the distributed development and GitHub and Jira or equivalents. Certainly Jira. I actually have a friend at Atlassian, if I'm saying that correctly, and he confirmed that there's not much disagreement with this fact that somebody mentioned in, I think it was a dzone article, Developer Zone. So I think it's dzone.net, dzone.com. It was basically Atlassian products, Jira, Bitbucket, Confluence. Is there another one? Jira. Well, anyway, those are enough. They create a noise environment that becomes more distracting and tends to actually hide information or make it difficult to assemble a picture in your head. So that's a case where this attempt to bolster communication and feed the program manager's need for pie charts and aging reports and bug closure rates and all these fun things that I first learned about when I was at Apple in 1993, that these tools aren't actually really helpful. But in general, if you're working on software with someone at a distance and you're not sitting next to each other, it's still reasonably comfortable to share information and work on things. And that really breaks down, I think, for the casual human who doesn't habitually collaborate. Document collaboration is not something people do day to day, like live collaboration or even change management, which Google Documents, Office 365, probably, what is that one? The Z something, Office, LibreOffice, all these products, they do change highlighting, document difference displays and commenting. So, spreadsheets, Word documents, all this stuff you can do between people. And to me, that's not dissimilar to this monolithic versus microservices concept and discussion and pros and cons arguments and all this. Is that how do you delegate things to more than, because I'm a monolith right now. I'm a monolithic application. I am designing project ideas, some in the real world. One I just described earlier. There's a couple other ones. There are some software projects. There's there's all the architecture that goes into the common code base that I think I've mentioned in another episode of Quoggling Sand. It's suffering from analysis paralysis, of course, because that's a monolithic feature. So if I added a program manager and a couple of other coders and a QA, and if you view that as microservices, then how do you coordinate all that on the fly? Because I don't have an office, right? I'm currently a solo entrepreneur, so I have an office for one and a table for none. And so you could view the staffing of a startup or a small business like this as a monolith to microservices migration. So how do you break up the tasks, and how do you use standard communication protocols like, we'll use Google Office documents. I don't know if it's called that. Google Workspace documents, Google Docs, documents, spreadsheets, slides, all that. So we'll use that. So that'll be a standard protocol that we'll use with document sharing, and we'll share stuff on a shared drive, and we'll use GitHub, and we'll use uh, I guess if we're using Google products, we can use the new chat and Meet and all the other whatever they're naming things nowadays, or Zoom or Telegram, or say, we can establish some common tools that are readily available, reasonably priced or free. So we'll be up and running with our communication back and forth. And then it's still a question of synchronizing things. And if we're not all meeting up in person, which I don't think is essential, but can be helpful, then how do you coordinate? And so when you get to the microservice messaging, event sourcing, the Kafka is the big thing now. I just saw an article today. Pulsar wants to be the Kafka killer, except they're both Apache projects. So that's curious, but that's another time. So just the intricacies of coordinating microservices and how that aligns with the intricacies of coordinating people is kind of interesting. So that's something I'm paying attention to as I try to kick off that nonprofit, which will require other people to participate in some way on our founding board of directors or possibly advisors, and then branching out from there. So how do you grow your organization in an organic, because I don't know if you've ever worked with a nonprofit board of people who are kind of, they're volunteering their time initially because you're just getting, it's like a startup. It's except there's maybe not as much upside directly in the first, however many years. So out of the goodness of our hearts, contributing time and energy. So how do you make the most of those resources and coordinate everything? So that's something that's been, this will be a recurring theme now and then as this unfolds, because there will no doubt be some wins and losses on the microservice front. The microservice, human microservice, is that a thing? Human microservice. Is it Conway's law that a software architecture will grow to resemble its human infrastructure in which it's deployed, or something like that? So maybe that's true, maybe it's not, I don't know. So I'm pondering that, and it's probably overkill on the software side, because certainly some smaller projects don't need to have all that thought put into them, unless they do. So when you think about it, I hate to claim that I'm even concerned about this, but just take the fail whale example, right? So Twitter was very poorly architected up front, and then who knew it would take off as it did, and they became sort of an unfunny joke for a while with the fail whale. And when you think about it, there's no reason, if you put some thought into it ahead of time, there's no reason for that to happen even with the computer infrastructure back then. There's really no. And so today, they are a frequent example in the presentations that I've watched, mostly on YouTube, like GoTo and QCon, and there's some others. If Twitter back in the day was using event sourcing, then there would have been no need to, do these table lookups and all that. It would have been just read through an event stream and publish it to a client, which makes sense. So something to think about. There are a couple of projects. I could talk about the food truck infrastructure, the mobile vendor business platform all day. So that will be a special show at some point. But, ideally there will be lots of people using that. And it's not just displaying a logo or marker on a map. There's some business going on behind the scenes, and some market analytics and some other stuff. So to make sure that works, and to roll back, or at least deal with user initiated changes, which could be in error. For example, if I book a mobile vendor and then I want to change it, that change should be visible. And then how to notify people who are subscribed to that event. I mean, literally, a physical event, a booking of some sort. So how do you notify people if the time changes or if it's canceled? So my existing code base had the presumption was there would be an updated column, and I actually had a table called DB message that would capture basically an operation against any table, so any database object. So event changed, and then later something else would go through and say some other background could go through and check and see if there's event changed, let's see what it is. But when you think about event sourcing, so much more straightforward. You have a topic that you send a message to, that this event time changed, date change, canceled, whatever, and anyone can subscribe to that, and there you go, done. You can generate a single email notification, a client mobile device, anything. You can do whatever you want. So the event stream notion makes a lot of sense. So it's been an interesting read and watch of YouTube. Sometimes, for as much as YouTube is troubling, and I believe I told the story last week about share video. So even though YouTube was several years, I think almost 2005, and we were futzing around in 1996. They probably launched when the technology had caught up, so we would have been way too early, and it would have sucked, and it would have died. So I don't really feel bad about that, but YouTube itself is problematic. But anyway, there's plenty of cool resources on there for, endless presentations over the years, which I consume probably too much. I need to sit at the keyboard more than I have been. So yeah, the push now on my end will be, how do I account for a microservice direction? And I've kind of wondered, actually, this would be a topic for a discussion if anybody listening to this has thoughts or experiences. So that I'm not totally impressed by this Saga notion, where you, I guess probably they always use the purchasing example, like printing a mailing label and fulfillment process and warehousing and shipping. So sure. So how do you take how do you do a transaction across multiple microservices, right? So I need to make sure that something like customer places order and order will be fulfilled. All of the steps between there are sort of a transaction, whether literally a transaction or approximating one. That's sort of a question, I suppose. But in my PostgreSQL ACID compliant database, I could very easily, I like a schema. So I have a schema for different, I could argue that they're microservice-ish, but not totally. But so if I had a customer schema and a shipping schema and so I suppose I've broken the database down, and even whether it's microservices or monolithic, at some point, if there's a bottleneck where the transactions are kind of collected and executed in a transaction, right? So you commit it at the end, or if it fails, it fails. So I need to look at how sagas work, because in my view, not to be confused with database view, in my view, it should be possible at smaller scales to implement a multiple service single transaction along these lines, but that doesn't scale at all if you want to go with like, I have 25 databases. And of course, it's a trap to think that you should always use one database for everything, whether it's one single database for everything or one database type for many things. So for example, I should not be using PostgreSQL to store documents. Right? There's perfectly serviceable document databases for that. Mongo, Couch, others. So yes, I could store content in a JSON-B column or even a text or an XML column, but say a JSON-B document stored in there, and that's all well and good, but that's not, Postgres is a Swiss Army knife perhaps, but there are better ways. So I cannot always assume that my transaction will take place in a single database. So it's an interesting thing as well. And this maps right back to people. Same thing. If once you have multiple people trying to coordinate tasks, do they talk to each other? Do they is there a deadlock dependency? Are they waiting without telling each other? Kind of interesting. I don't know if I remember. I don't know if I remember. That's true. I don't remember if I mentioned this in this podcast. It was definitely in the FFS Talk podcast. Delivering Big Delta. So if you want to listen to those ramblings, that was sort of a seminal, like, oh, this is what this podcast should be about. But I was pondering based on some comments that Jim Rutt made. Jim Rutt is big on Game B, and he kind of caught a whiff of holacracy, and he was talking to the author whose name I believe is Brian Robertson. I'm totally guessing at that. It's something like that. So holacracy, an interesting idea, very clearly rooted in software, and then having people behave as though they are arguably microservices, operating in circles if it's more than one person, the communication that happens between them. So I've read holacracy, and Downtown Project and Zappos adopted holacracy with varying levels of success. Is probably a small word, a strong word. It's also a small word, but it's so I'm not the first one to even ponder that the communication between different people and interaction on a completion level. Once you have multiple teams or even multiple people that are not in a team, so cross-team, cross-individual function, where you both need to accomplish something to enable the other to accomplish something, things like that can get tricky. And the example I always give with when I'm addressing my concerns about holacracy, I usually point out a story that I've simplified, but which is based on an actual story, which I heard directly from Downtown Project people. And it was, if you have two circles, so two teams of more than one person each, they work on things, and only if there is a tension between them, so an issue, a bug, do they communicate? Do they raise attention? A tension, not attention. So one team may say, hey, you are doing this and it's blocking us, and then they'll say, oh, let's resolve that. And there's a whole process that seems maybe a lot of communication. It's a heavier protocol than maybe most casual employees are interested in. But end of the day, that's supposed to resolve everything. So the example I usually give is, and this again is based on an actual anecdote from a real situation that the Downtown Project encountered. So this is not the actual, but it's based on it, right? So it's illustrative, not quoting. So if you imagine these two circles, one is in charge of building a building and one is in charge of tearing down the same building, but they don't actually interact because every day the team building the building just builds more, and every day the team tearing down the building just tears down more. And so they're always accomplishing their goals, and they don't seem to be, unless somebody notices, like, oh, wait a minute, you guys are, and we're doing, oh, that's not going to work. Tension. But in this case, that wasn't happening because there wasn't like a direct visual contact I guess you could say, in the anecdote. So, this was really happening where two groups were sort of opposing each other in progress, undoing the other's efforts, and it was kind of silly. So these are the sorts of things where when I look at microservices and then I look at some of the human interactions that I've either heard of or witnessed or then been a part of over my ridiculous years, I find it fascinating. So I think this will be something that I will try to code. It will shape some of my implementation, and then I will probably talk about it some more. So I will see about my right now. So far I've taken my monolithic database, which sort of grew from the needs of my mobile vendor platform, but my goal was always to leverage. If you think about mobile vending, there's venue, schedule, customer, vendor. So my customers are the vendors, their customers are our customers. There's you could include a loyalty program. You could do nowadays online ordering, so menu presentation and some sort of a transaction. So there's a lot of parts, but if you take those parts and you don't put them in the big ball of mud, then I could create other applications on this platform that has sort of emerged. And of course, when software emerges organically growing like weeds, that's always a good sign. So I've been spending a great deal of time on what do I want to do with all this stuff and how to best roll these out. So yeah, these will all be educational for me and anyone else who's curious. So there you go. So now it is story time. And before I get to the story, I will remind you that I am publishing my show notes for the podcasts, not only this podcast, Quoggling Sand podcast, but the FFS Talk podcast and the Hugo Floss podcast that I do with my mom. And my mom has been a podcaster for more contiguous years than I have been, although I was podcasting before she has been more recently. But anyway, so yeah, my mom rocks a Zoom H4n Pro for field recording and a couple of mics, and so there you go. So it's interesting. So we basically turned our pandemic phone chats. We didn't take those directly, but we said, we were on the phone chatting about this or that, or how my dad was doing, and all. So hey, why not? So 3 podcasts to choose from, and they all have associated Substack newsletters that go out to carry the show notes and the links to the show and all that. So be sure and check that out. In the show notes for this episode, there will be a link to the show notes profile page on Substack. In the description of your RSS-based podcast reader, in the description with the mention of the show and who's in it and all that. So there will be a link to quogglingsand.substack.com. You can certainly go there from what I just said, or you can click on the link in your favorite podcast catching software. I found the show notes to be a more interesting, like from a visual presentation and from a distribution standpoint. Not all podcast software makes the text content of the RSS feed, the C data, if you will. They don't all make it so easy to read. They don't format it particularly well in every case. I know Anchor, the sort of hub from which we publish, is not great at displaying that text, the HTML. So, and the same, review. I have not published any podcast stuff, but both review and Substack are better at showing what I would like them to show as far as like presentation. The text is fine. Anchor has a 4K character limit, I think, in the description, which is usually fine. But the newsletters, you can go as big as you want. And so I go a little bit longer, but that's fine. But I think the newsletter wave, kind of like Clubhouse, I think it's still, maybe it's exposing some of the things that we all would like better. So we'll see. But for now, that was a bit of a tangent here. So, but for now, the show notes, quogglingsand.substack.com. And if you're really curious, you can go to my profile page on Buy Me a Coffee. And while you do not have to buy me a coffee, for the sake of simplicity and a single source of truth, I've been placing links to the podcast, the show notes, and I will place links to what will eventually be the Casa Nunzia Foundation website and additional stuff regarding that, and surely more will appear. So if you follow me on buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo, you will see Quoggling Sand, you'll see all the other stuff I've mentioned. And by all means, you can buy me a coffee. It will go towards coffee beans. So, but no obligation. Anyway, so story time. All right. So like I said, this is not necessarily a super happy story, but it's kind of interesting just by way of reflection. I mentioned my birthday is coming up. There have been many before it, but this year, this is the one. So I worked so first of all, I entered the workforce in early 1990s, and Silicon Valley, I had always wanted to work at Apple. I had always wanted to do something with computers and all that stuff. So, moving to Silicon Valley at the end, or what would be soon the end of the recession, the Bush recession, we're getting started with the Clinton era. Since Al Gore invented the internet, we were getting ready to rock and roll. So I actually, my first job when I moved to Silicon Valley was at Supermac Technologies. And I met Lou Doctor. Not directly, but he was the one who laid me off. And later I would work for Lou Doctor at True Vision. And there are many instances where I would work with the same person at multiple companies, and I would cross paths with the same people, and I got to know many interesting people. And it turns out this all started when I was in college. One of my classmates was David Carlton. And at some point, I was working at SCM Microsystems, and smart cards, stuff like that. And Netscape was doing stuff with smart cards, which they never really completed sort of a plan, but they had some ideas. And so David was working in the security group and was about to move to the Java group. And so he said, "Hey, you're doing smart cards, right? I think they want to do something with smart cards here. Why don't you send me your resume and I will..." And this is back in the days when somebody said that, they would actually hand it to someone. Now, when somebody asks for a resume, who knows what happens. But so David lovingly placed the resume in the hands of the correct person, and I eventually would work there. Now, anyone who's in the computer field, you have heard this quote, or you've probably read it.
You want to hear the song Missing?
Computer, stop. That's another podcast for another day. You would think voice identification would no, well, I guess it was me saying the C word. Anyway, you have heard this quote, no doubt, or read it. And it is something like, there are two problems, or the two main problems in computer science are cache line invalidation, or just cache invalidation, and naming things. And there's a variant that was not a direct quote, but it's a paraphrase where they say the main problems in computer science are cache invalidation, naming things, and off by one errors. So, haha, Yeah. But anyway, so the main original version of the quote, cache and validation, naming things, that was Phil Carlton, and that was David's father. So Phil was a principal or fellow. I think he was an engineering fellow at some point at Netscape with Kip. I can't remember his name, but yeah, Phil was one of they were, engineering fellows. Say that's true. So Phil had done a lot of work with our group, security group, and we had many interactions with him. He was not far away on the same floor in the same building, so I was on friendly terms with him. I had been to the Carlton home several times in Cupertino, and so yeah, nice guy. He actually, because of his connection to the beer place, which is totally escaping me at the moment. Well, there was always a keg of beer from the place. I'm totally spacing on the name, but I'll put in the notes. Gordon Biersch, thank you. That just popped into my head. So Gordon Biersch always had a keg of Gordon Biersch beer of some kind in our kitchen area. And strangely enough, despite what you are probably thinking at this moment, it was not emptied out daily. It was just adults with a keg of beer handy in case you wanted to grab a beer some evening. So that was actually a pleasant accessory, but not abused. Anyway, so when I was working at Netscape, it would be my birthday, and I was staying home in the morning of my birthday because I was out the night before and I was tired. So I was planning to go into work. It was a flex time. It's not a big deal. So, I think it was not a mystery that it was my birthday, so that was fine. And unfortunately, one of my coworkers, Lisa Repka, called me at home. She said, "Have you heard about David's parents?" And I said, "No. What happened?" And so the Carltons and I think at least one family friend, were in Italy, and we're getting onto a freeway, a highway, roadway, and a tractor trailer truck was coming up behind them and was unable to stop, and so collided with them. And long story short, David Carlton became he was orphaned that day. So, yeah, let's keep it simple. So, obviously, that I will not forget that particular day. So, around my birthday, it's always kind of interesting as I reflect on my career and my interactions and who I've come across in my travels. I've met some very, very smart people, and I've met some very annoying people. I try to remember the smart ones and try to get them connected on LinkedIn at some point, so I at least have their resume/business card handy. And so Netscape was a crazy place to work at the time. So not only Phil Carlton, but there was Jamie Zwinski, there was Tom Dell. If you ever visited the rotten.com website, I don't remember the date, but I certainly remember the evening when Tom came into work and said, "Hey, you should check out my new website." And the day Howard Stern mentioned it, and I worked with a guy who was like infamous for the Teamon. Well, if you were a nerd, for the Teamon or Teamon Pro debugger on the Mac, which was my favorite debugger because MaxBug kind of sucked. So he worked that guy. I know that guy. Brendan Ike of Brave fame now worked on the other side of the cue ball for me. So the list goes on, and that was just at Netscape. And then you go, and then Tahir Algamal. I remember we were in a meeting, and I had read, I think I read both editions at the time of Bruce Schneier's books, what was it called? Applied Cryptography. So there was the blue book and the red book. So I had them both, read them both. They're, editions of the same book. And so we were in a meeting one day, and there's Tahir. I said, that's Tahir Elgamal. That was the Elgamal backpack algorithm, right? And then I did a project with RSA. So like, oh, Rivis, Shamir, and Edelman. Geez. I mean, so all these cool interactions, not to mention, I mean, Netscape was the first third of my career. Working at Apple, I was working in Mariani 1, which was the first Apple address on Mariani, but in Cupertino. That was like the first Apple building, which is kind of cool. And so all the people I met there, the random characters behind the scenes, seeing when I worked in the Newton Group, some Walter Smith, he was kind of a luminary. There were several people whose names escape me, but that's when I worked there. That's when I first heard about not 10 forward. That was a meeting room. I cannot remember the name of the project, but that was when I first heard about porting the Mac OS to Intel processors. And of course, I had worked at Apple when they were porting from 68K to PowerPC. So, I already had hands-on, like, yeah, okay, that's probably doable. Philips, SCM, just all these various companies, and then the people that I ran across when I worked at Palm, various characters. Travis G, if you're following Fuchsia, he's becoming more famous once again. If you were a BOS fan, you probably know about his work on that path. People that are fans of the is it Haiku OS? Sort of the BOS based, always beta OS. Oh, what isn't really? But anyway, so I've had some very interesting interactions over the many years of my career, and it's been an interesting ride so far. And as a solo entrepreneur, I don't necessarily get to interact with people like I usually enjoy. So I'm looking forward now that the pandemic is all but over, if you don't count the Delta variant and the fact that Nevada is one of 7 states in the U.S. that has an increasing number of cases and a lower percentage of vaccinated individuals. But forgetting all that, looking forward to traveling again and getting out into the tech world, whether it's related to the foundation we're starting and working with people on assistive technologies and co-creation, or other projects I've got cooking. Looking forward to it. So that's my reflection on my upcoming birthday. You can probably do some rough calculations based on my other date that I mentioned, and I'll let you do that yourself. An exercise left to the listener. I'm also going to cut it short today. Usually I end up around an hour, but you have better things to do, and I have candles to light on my fictitious cake. So eventually I would like to address the RSS feed conundrum that I am not a fan of, but there will be plenty of topics along those lines as I reflect on the publishing of podcasts and how I do not enjoy it because it seems cumbersome and unnecessarily legacy laden. Apple just launched their podcast thing. I don't know what the iTunes versus podcasts or whatever. I don't know what they're doing, but Apple and Google and everybody has their podcast platform, and Anchor and Spotify and Amazon, and monetization and exclusivity, and I don't know about this. So that'll be maybe next week or the following week. We'll see. In the meantime, thank you for listening. Thank you for visiting my buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo profile, if for no other reason than to just keep track of some of the stuff I'm working on. Why don't I have a blog page or some other thing? And that is a good question. And the answer is because I'm still not exactly sure where I want to plant the roots. There is a danhugo.com domain in my possession, and so that will be a hub of sorts, but I'm really thinking Tumblr style at the moment. I've always thought that was an interesting idea. Not a fan of WordPress and so on. So we'll see what happens there. So buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo for a list of links and stuff that I'm working on, just as a central, easily accessible place. And you are welcome to do what it says, or you're welcome to not. There's no obligation. Did you know you can join in on this podcast? You can tell me what you want to talk about, and we will, let's have a conversation rather than me just rambling on about this and that. And I'm really thinking about, I'm not a fan of Zoom. Partially, there are a variety of reasons, but they don't, I can't record easily because I don't use Mac or Windows platforms to run their application on. So you need the application to do the recording. I don't like that idea, but whatever. So that said, I would like to eventually have some sort of a drop-in or some sort of a discussion or chat, and maybe do these regular times. I'd like to, especially as code is deployed for the world to see, kind of some commentary, some rambling about what you're working on, what I've been working on. Hey, look, there's another thing, and so on and so on. So you can always email me, dhugo@quogglingsand.com. You can, we have a Twitter account, Quoggling Sand, and all the usuals, although I mostly just post on Twitter a little bit. Social media is not my favorite, but you can do all these things. Track me down, be a guest on the show. Let's talk about what you're working on. Maybe you can complain about what I'm working on, or give me some cool ideas about how to fix what I'm working on. Maybe I can do the same for you, and people listening can sit back and relax. So thank you again for listening, and take care. And don't forget the weekend edition on review. There's a link to that in the show notes. Subscribe if you like. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.